I'm going to introduce myself and my company briefly to kick this session off. My name is Philip Kopp. I am the CEO of Connectric Networks. And Connectric Networks is a sensor company. We manufacture wireless sensors for monitoring environmental and energy conditions, primarily in near real time, for the purpose of making buildings more intelligent and ultimately healthier and more productive and environmentally sustainable. And we, provide the sensor networks and connectivity options that enable retrofit of large-scale buildings and operations for the collection of these new types of data sources.
Wonderful. And Facilio is a software platform for operations maintenance in buildings. It's a portfolio wide solution that allows property owners, operators to consolidate data from building systems, sensors, and whatever operational data that is in buildings and building systems, and unify all of that data and offer functionality that is kind of siloed in multiple places in operations and maintenance today. That is commonplace software solutions that you'll see for maintenance management or service management and tenant engagement or occupant engagement, things around energy management and fault diagnostics. All of these functionalities are offered as solutions on top of our platform. And the platform also allows customers to build specific solutions around automating their operations. It's a IoT platform, so to speak, because we're working with the systems data and data from buildings, but it's a bi-directional integration with the building system, so you can actually automate, not just collect data and use the data, for analytics and use that data in your workflows, but also go back in and change things in your HVAC system or whatnot, to really automate workflows in your property maintenance and operations. So that's in a nutshell what Facilio does.
Excellent.
And in today's session, we're going to be focused on IoT in smart buildings, right? And that has a role for both hardware and software, in how this is going to shape up the industry and how it's going to transform smart building solutions. So I think Phil will actually provide a lot of insights around, as a hardware vendor, in terms of how he sees the market and solutions in smart building space. And I'll do the same from a software perspective. From a software perspective, why don't we get started with where the industry is at, and what is the fundamental shift that you see happening in the industry? Why the why behind IoT for smart buildings?
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. So essentially, what we see is a discourse around what the definition of intelligent building actually is. And I think that's been going on for quite a long time, many years, maybe 5 or 10 years. And the initial kind of push into the intelligent building has been very centric around the sort of IP connectivity backbone within the building, and kind of unifying both operational technology and information technology across a single set of architecture and infrastructure. So I think that's kind of phase one. And now we are entering this sort of pandemic or post-pandemic era where everything is fundamentally very, very changed. And I think today, in the near term at least, where we see this shift happening is really around how to essentially reoccupy buildings. And so effectively, because of the pandemic and things around the COVID and other, frankly, other issues which have always existed in buildings, health issues, now are really bubbling up to the forefront, and are top of mind and conversation starters, as opposed to just afterthoughts. And I think what's happening is, in order for buildings to really be effective, they need to be reoccupied, and employers are trying to figure out what they need to do in order to get employees to return to the workplace and return to those collaborative type of environments. So we're not just doing everything on Zoom meetings continuously all day, every day. And I think there's a bit of fatigue around that as well from the employee perspective. But there's a very legitimate concern around the safety and the operational environment within the workplace. And so we see that in short term, basically being the big drive. And I think what this is going to do is force the industry to make technology adoptions, which had previously been maybe nice to have things, to now being really mandatory, being an integral part of the value of a building, in really being able to get people to use the building. Because frankly, if the buildings are at 10 or 25% occupancy, all the rest of it just doesn't matter that much, right? We need to get them back to normal levels. And so there's a couple of go-to strategies. We see three, really, I think three kind of pillars, or kind of legs of the stool. It's around utilization. So understanding, kind of the concentration and how people are using workplaces, and this sort of dynamic, flexible environment where you don't know which day you're going to go into the office per se, but you're going to round together a group of team members and you're going to go there and you're going to need to find a space and go do your work. And that may be very dynamic. It could change from day to day, hour to hour. So we see a lot of look an emphasis into that. The indoor air quality, that the health, the ventilation of the environment. Is it, is the air clean? Is it a healthy place to be in? And then I think, finally, it's the remote operations aspect, which I know Facilio, really is a leader in aggregating that portfolio level view of being able to understand from an operations perspective, or building maintenance and building engineering side of things, what's happening in the building and how can we become more proactive about maintaining that building and operating it sort of remotely, so we don't have to have these big teams of on-site engineering and management groups in every single building. And I think the technology is going to enable much lighter, very remote sort of management perspective of real estate portfolios. And ultimately, all of those things together equal a more profitable and more sustainable building environment, and certainly a healthier and a more productive one for the people that are occupying it.
Great. Yeah, yeah. I think you summed it up well, and I agree on all of those things. From my perspective, as beyond back to work, I see this beyond back to work. Like the industry is in the cusp of very large scale transformation, at least when it comes to property operations, right?
Hmm.
We're not going to go back to normal. Not at least for the way the buildings are operated, because fundamentally a lot of things have changed. And even when we are actually back to 100% occupancy, the way people interact and live and work in these buildings are not going to be like in 2019 anymore. So that has a lot of bearing on how um, you know O&M functions in buildings, and we see a lot of that change already happening, but that's just the beginning of it, right? So over the next 5 years, as you rightly mentioned, what would have happened, in the next 15 to 20 years is likely to probably happen over the next 5 years, and technology has a
It's
huge
very
role.
accelerated. Yeah, it's
Yeah, technology has a huge role to play, and that's really exciting as technology vendors for us. I'm really curious to see how
sure.
this plays out. Well, talking about technology, would you like to kind of weigh in on what's really holding us back, or from a technology perspective, how do you see what is the current ecosystem like, and where do you see the challenges lie in adopting some of these changes that we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think this is an incredible subject we could speak about for a very long time. I'm going to kind of draw on the first three pillars that I mentioned, and then maybe weigh a little bit in on our perspective in terms of the architecture of how this needs to work. And I think fundamentally it starts off with that initial comment you made about the unification of data across different siloed systems. And what we see even today, by and large, in the marketplace is a lot of discrete products or systems that solve a particular problem. And so this kind of drives the industry into what I call an integration or deep integration model, where you have many, many disparate systems that the building operator has to manage and the tenant has to manage, maybe separately or together, and trying to tie all these together in a way that makes them essentially operable. Because as you know, if you have 10 different systems to manage, it becomes very burdensome and very cumbersome to sort of operate all those independent systems. So going back to that particular point, the way we looked at this from Connectric's perspective is that there are many different use cases to solve for in the building. And so that could be, the utilization we discussed. It could be indoor air quality. It could be HVAC operations and controls, or lighting systems operations and controls. It can be data. It can be unified, voice and video. There's so security. There's so many different functions and use cases that are happening within, each of these built environments that are pretty complex. And so we said, we want to kind of simplify that process by unifying from the hardware side, the architecture, so that the building owner can have a single set of infrastructure, and then a plethora or various different types of sensors that are going to provide for each of those use cases. Whether it's utilization or energy management or energy information systems or greenhouse gas reporting and carbon mitigation and some of those other things, which I think are also more not in the short term, the reoccupation term, but over the long term, going to be incredibly impactful on the value of real estate, those non-financial aspects. So we wanted to design and architect a solution where you could kind of put it in and grow and install and enable those individual use cases over time without having to do it all at once and without having to buy 10 different systems in order to do that. And that general theme kind of drives our solution and that kind of message of unification of what it is. And the end result is we have a basic set of infrastructure that can read in near real time of many various different types of sensors, from occupancy to temperature, indoor air quality, energy, and so on, that kind of sets that architecture. And I think the real challenge that we're seeing in terms of adoption at this point, and where I believe we're making some very serious breakthroughs, and we're seeing the industry writing specs and RFIs and RFPs that essentially describe this solution. And the main challenges are really around security. How is implementing these IoT devices going to impact the security of both critical, mission critical operational systems that the building depends on to operate, as well as the security of the data and information and IP that tenants and occupiers and the companies that work within these office environments are generating. And so there's a very, legitimate and real concern over how those things come together and how can we responsibly manage that. and then as well in terms of the overall ongoing operation and maintenance. And I think that's really one of the bigger concerns as well, is if we put in, a new set of sensors or a new set of technology or new software, can it handle what we're doing? Is it going to break down? And how hard is it going to be to maintain that? And if our goal is to actually, streamline the operations and the maintenance of the facility overall, but we're installing technology that requires a whole new set of maintenance procedures, is that really net, is that beneficial? And so, going back, I think those are the key areas that we try to address in terms of the architecture, unification of the hardware and the infrastructure, and then as well as from a maintenance perspective, we're installing battery powered devices, and we need those devices to transmit for 10 years, or at least 5 years or longer, because we don't want them to have to be continuously maintained. And I've been in the wireless sensor business for a very long time, almost 20 years now, and I know for a fact that when a device battery dies, usually the device dies with the batteries. So you need to make sure that these things are easy to operate and maintain, and don't create new burdens. And I think if you can get over those two aspects, the security and the maintenance, you're going to find that the people who touch these systems become much more open, much more accepting, much more adoptive to being able to use them, when they realize that these systems are not creating new risks, and they're not essentially creating new work. They're supposed to create less work. And I think we're really at a turning point where the market is starting to see that, yes, that's possible. And it is technology driven, frankly speaking.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The way I see the challenges in from coming from a software perspective, right? I see this as a problem of silos, where in property operations, especially if you're operating a portfolio, much of it handles at a very building level, right? So you have different teams operating buildings, maybe third parties working on these buildings, and there is no unification of any sort. Maybe thanks to the ESG reporting standards, evolving, there is some sort of visibility into how these buildings are operating from a energy and sustainability perspective standpoint. But beyond that, and as portfolio owners are figuring out now, it's hard to get. They lack the visibility of what else is happening in the building. From a back to work readiness, everybody's kind of scrambling to see where those buildings are at. And the problem is because most of these are operated in silos with their own independent systems, teams that are far removed from other buildings or other operations at a portfolio level. And even within these buildings, all the systems are kind of silo. And for the kind of challenge that you're talking about, bringing in new sensors and all the data sources, deploying all of that, none of the existing systems are adequate to handle any of that data. And as you rightly point out, that is going to add more in terms of maintenance and risk standpoint. It's going to add a lot more to the plate, rather than making it simpler, making the life simpler for O&M stakeholders. So looking at how these systems are kind of inadequate to the challenges that are in front of us, it's going to be fundamentally a new kind of architecture, new kind of solution that is required to kind of tackle the problem that we have here, and to bring about all the transformation that you're talking about here. And that rightly involves a lot of hardware and sensors, as you point out, but also has a lot of bearing on how the software systems are deployed and architected, and across portfolio, not at a building level, but across portfolio, right? I see this as I mentioned silos, but I also see it as a data silo and functionality silo problem. So right now we don't have data unified across the buildings and systems. So it creates a data silo problem. And you also have a lot of these point solutions being used. You use a separate software for maintenance management, and a separate software for energy management, energy reporting, ESG, benchmarking, another software for fall diagnostics. A lot of it is done even at a property level. So you end up using different systems in different properties. So it's not even consolidated at a portfolio level. So you end up with a lot of functional silos as well. So you have data silos and functional silos, and it's hard to kind of have a streamlined operations across these systems and teams, and data that is dispersed in all of these places. And that's really the challenge. And what is going to be the new architecture and new way of deploying these hardware and software and realizing value in a way that it will simplify eventually the life of O&M stakeholders, right? So that's really the challenge.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I mean, we see this frequently when we discuss these kinds of projects with customers, because they literally do have different systems in every building. And so when you design an integration, from an integration perspective, we're going to install a bunch of new sensors, and we're going to collect a lot of data about what's going on in that building that the existing systems are not already collecting. And when we look at that, and we have to say, well, there's a different integration point in every single one of your buildings, because there's a different system in every one of your buildings. And what I really like about the kind of partnership that we have, that we're talking about, where you combine this sort of hybrid approach of an IoT hardware solution and then a real building a management software solution, in the way that we're discussing today. What's nice about that is we have a unified, a single point of entry ingestion for all this new data. And then you can combine that together with all of these individual disparate systems that exist in the existing buildings. And what I see the value this unlocking is not really the kind of value that these vertical management systems are trying to unlock each. It's a new kind of value. And we really look at it as a data strategy type of a play, in the sense that, a portfolio owner or a building operator or management company or set of tenants that has a large real estate footprint, they don't know what they don't know. And because all these systems are separate, you don't have any idea what kind of value you're potentially losing when you can actually combine these data sets, and you can start to understand, hey, well, absenteeism in the workplace is a direct function of HVAC management. And you don't know that if you don't have those data sets unified someplace, or you might have a hunch, but you can't really prove it. And now with this type of a solution in architecture, you can bring those data points together, and you can say, hey, wait a minute, when the temperature is too high or too low above a certain point, less people are here, or more people are here. And you can really start to understand much better how that kind of value gets uncovered. And it's a data strategy around unifying all this information. It's incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful.
Great. Yeah. Um, Maybe from there we can talk about you mentioned a new kind of architecture on the hardware side of things in buildings, right? Can you kind of elaborate on how you see this um, shaping up, and what you think is a good approach to deploying all this new hardware in buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's pretty much what most of my waking hours are spent figuring out. So, we looked at and have been around this kind of space for quite a long time. And as I mentioned, there's been sort of a unification around this IP backbone in the building, and plugging everything into the local area network in the building, and then largely function of trying to get data out into the cloud. And of course, there's certain advantages and disadvantages to doing that. And what we really came in looking at those fundamentals of security and sort of the longevity and the ease of operating and maintaining those systems. And really, what we came up with was the need for sort of a parallel architecture for this type of information. And the reality is that the information that's being produced by things like temperature sensors and occupancy sensors and light meters and energy meters is fundamentally is a different kind of information than being, transporting Zoom video calls or CCTV camera data or even HVAC controls, low voltage controls networks. And so we thought, you have to design the appropriate architecture for the type of data that you're moving. And what's happened is many of these standards-based type of architectures, particularly the IP-based ones, they really require a lot of energy from an actually operating the device perspective to continuously be talking to the network. And I think when you add a whole lot of devices, and we're seeing office buildings, with thousands of new devices being added into those buildings, um, what kind of a security footprint and risk does having all those IP-enabled devices? Can a hacker get into a device? We know they can. Can they get into a device and then get on the network and then get into business information systems and then get into operational technology? And that's a really big risk. So we're seeing the market coming to us and actually starting to really appreciate the architecture we design, which is a separate parallel network where all these little devices can speak to each other and then essentially be aggregated and forwarded into a kind of a software platform like Facilia, where the data analytics and even the control can be optimized based on this new information about knowing in real time what your energy demand is on the chiller or the cooling tower or the VFD, percentage, or the lighting levels, or the temperature and humidity in the buildings and all those kinds of points. So we have all these kinds of data collection points essentially being collected outside of the network. They're not touching any of the IT infrastructure that's in the building, and they're not touching any of the operational infrastructure that's in the building. They're just collecting this data, and then that makes it much simpler for also the property owner, manager, and tenant to manage, because there's not too many points of entry and egress you have to control. There's basically just one point, which is your edge gateway that you need to control and secure, and it's up to them where the data moves. And so it's a lot more secure that way. And then fundamentally, what it allows us to do is also speed up a lot the timing of that data and not have to wait for 15-minute or hourly data collection periods. But essentially, these sensors can report on an event. If someone opens a door or walks in a room or opens a window, that information is immediately passed through to the analytics and the operational systems that it's connected to. And I think that provides a lot of obvious advantages.
Very interesting. And coming from a software standpoint, there is also, fundamentally speaking, in terms of how these systems are architected and deployed. We talked about functional silo, right? So think about utilizing this data that is coming off of this IoT sensors and the use cases around it. So right now, the O&M team is in a position to not just monitor occupancy in different spaces and buildings, but also be able to kind of use that to ventilate the space properly, and also have visibility over all of this, space, indoor air quality, and occupancy metrics across the portfolio, and be able to also communicate that effectively with the occupants. So they are comfortable enough, and and we're just talking about one single use case around just making sure the spaces are safe to occupy and communicating the data around it, and maybe using that data to actually ventilate the space. But there are a lot of other use cases around how the O&M teams have to adapt to the new reality, right? So as people are coming back to work, there is quite often the challenge of managing these schedules, right? Not everybody is coming back to work at the same time. Your tenants are going to what be coming up with scheduling requests practically every single day, and different buildings and property managers have to act, and your building systems and BMS have to cope, and building engineers and all the workflows, the kind of manual work that happens in a building just to make sure you put in a schedule for an after hour schedule request or a weekend schedule request, even during the normal times, so to speak, you can get away with that in the normal time because it was one-off request. Now it's happening pretty much on a daily basis, and
In real time,
yeah,
hourly, minutely basis, even. Yeah.
exactly. So what happens when a tenant decides, I'm gonna let my employees choose when they want to walk in, and you may have 10% occupancy one day, and 50% occupancy the other day. How are you going to manage all the safety around the spaces, but also all your HVAC, comfort? How do you make sure? How do you ensure comfort for all the occupants? And that's a huge challenge, and that has a bearing on what kind of systems and software that you want to deploy, and how you are going to utilize this data, and how you're going to holistically integrate that data with your existing workflows and software systems and automation systems. And none of the existing systems that are currently deployed are adequate to actually kind of cater to all of that needs, right? You talking about integrating a bunch of systems, and that will take probably a year to even set it up, if you are if you're trying to make it work with whatever you have already. So it fundamentally requires a new type of architecture on the software side, and a lot of that has to do with an unified cloud system that can aggregate the data. That starts there, so you have all of the data in single place, and then um, the same platform being able to kind of have integration options, either to work with your existing systems, or be open enough to build some of these workflows on top of the platform. And that's one of the reasons why we decided uh, to build a lot of applications that are commonplace in building operations in Feslio platform, because we realized it's not just the data alone, right? So if you provide data alone, you become a data middleware, and that's good. You can actually do your analytics and reporting, and make the data useful for various stakeholders. That's solving one part of the problem, but the other part of the problem is, what are the other systems that are commonplace? You have to kind of maintain your equipment in the building. You have to interact with your tenants and occupants and service their requests. You have to do energy management. You have to
Mhm.
analyze the data and do fault diagnostics, and to make sure your buildings are running efficiently. So there are a lot of these needs around building operations, and there is a lot of value in having a single system do that. Right now there is no one single system that can actually do it, but we decided to build all of these applications on our platform. So you can not just unify all of the data, but you can also unify much of the functionality that is required around building O&M, and bring all the stakeholders to a single place, and create seamless workflows between these end applications. So that's a new kind of architecture on the software side that we are envisioning and bringing to market in for a new IoT based smart building landscape.
Yeah, there's two really important points I think that you touched on, and one of them is simply that we joke about the fact that we're going to increase the amount of data being collected in these buildings by 100 times or more, maybe even 1,000 times in some cases. And so the existing systems can't even really handle the existing data. So what's going to happen when you multiply that times 100? And I think what the customers and the market need to understand is that while a pretty front end interface is nice to have, and there's different features, and there's lots of different platforms that are out there, but really what's behind the scenes, the back end and the engine and the scalability of that drives these systems is critically important. And so you really need to look at a mature type of a solution that can scale, because otherwise you're going to invest in a platform, you're going to solve one or two of your use cases, and then you're going to hit a dead end, right? You're not going to be able to expand and move beyond that when you start to discover the value that actually unifying the data provides you with. So it's very important, and I think that's a very impressive, aspect of your platform and the way you've architected it, and I think it's very complementary to our, sort of a thought process in the evolution of these smart buildings, that you're going to build use cases on use cases, and you're going to unify, and as you unify that data, you get this exponential value that you can create out of that, and you don't want to hit a dead end when you're just about to find that golden nugget of value.
True, and um, there is that brings us to this need for collaboration between hardware players and software players in the marketplace, right? That's probably the new reality that we are going to face. Which is kind of fundamentally different from what the industry is used to so far. Maybe can you talk a little bit about what is that new reality and what is required of the hardware software vendors in the marketplace to and how they should
Yeah,
collaborate?
I think it's very exciting because it talks to your point about, what's kind of holding back the intelligent building or the smart building market. And I think to a large extent, it's kind of the vendor's fault, in a sense, in that, the vested interest of the vendor has always been to kind of try to lock the customer in to a very long term, probably very lucrative relationship. And so the customers have matured a lot, the market has matured a lot, and people are realizing, hey, we need flexibility. We don't know what's going to happen from one year to the next. We don't know what our buildings are going to demand of us. And this has been a conversation for a while, but the pandemic has really hit this point home, because there's been huge changes in a very short period of time, that are inciting new use cases that nobody needed 12 months ago. So I think, the customers need this flexibility. And what we see is it's a business model. It's also a technical architecture where rather than having a single vertical vendor, or an OEM that just supplies everything to you from your hardware, your software, your maintenance, your O&M, and all the rest of that, but locks you into a long-term contract. I think what we're seeing now is this hybrid, I like to call it a hybrid architecture, where companies like Connectric and Facilio work together to bring the hardware and software pieces together for the customer, but give them this kind of flexibility that they're able to mix and match different components. They're able to integrate systems from different vendors. Even our hardware, although we produce hardware and we want the customer to buy our hardware is fundamentally set up to be able to integrate hardware from other sensor makers and manufacturers. So we can plug in another sensor manufacturer's device into our network and read that device over the network and still process it into the Facilio platform as a single unified, point of entry from those other devices as well. So it's really about this kind of, flexible kind of Lego bricks approach where you can choose the best of every world for what the particular application or use case that you're trying to solve today, but also the ones you'll discover that you need to solve tomorrow and into the future. And it is fundamentally very different because the customers have always leaned on the vendor, to the OEMs, to kind of be their point of information and expertise and reference. And I think they're becoming, a little bit more sophisticated now to realize, hey, wait a minute, we need GHG reporting, we need automation controls, we need reoccupation uses, we need all these different things. And that guy over there may be good at this thing, he might not be the best at all of those different things. So we need to be able to combine the right, functions together. And this is the kind of, business, but we also don't want to make it too complicated. for the customer, right? We don't want to make them have to think too hard about what all these different components are. And so I think, another big part of it is going to be the simplification, really, of this hybrid model, where they can come to Connectric and Facility and we can say, look, this is easy. This is a package. We've done it before, exactly what you need to have. We'll go drop it in your building, and within, literally a few days or weeks, maybe it's up and running. And you don't have to think about it too much. You don't have to hire, an expensive consultant to figure it all out for you. It's pretty much just there, and ready to consume.
Yeah, and be also flexible in a way that they can layer in more vendors on both on the hardware and the software side, and the architecture of it being open enough that customer reap the benefit of uh, the choice, in picking
Hmm.
these vendors, and every vendor being married to this philosophy. It's sort of a hardware software separation, so to speak, but also sort of a marriage of hardware and software solutions to the benefit of the customer, right? Which is fundamentally different from the way the industry is used to, where one vendor basically supplies the whole solution, including
Hmm.
the hardware and the software, for one specific need, like BMS or access control or air quality. The new IoT systems that's coming to the marketplace, I've seen some systems go in the direction, right? So they supply the sensors and also some analytics software or some sort of software that the does some analytics of the data, off of the data that comes from the sensor, and not being really open enough to make that data useful or valuable in other systems, which is basically the old way, but it will practically be adding more silos and complicating things for the end user. um, so the kind of model that we have for this new architecture is for the hardware and software vendors to adopt an open architecture and be flexible enough.
It's
That's a
To me,
great,
it's
great.
very exciting because it's so beneficial to the customer, at the end of the day. And I think you're right. The IoT and the OT, sort of the old model, are pretty similar, from that respect, that they're trying to kind of build a little bit of a moat around the customer. And I think taken a look at this from a fundamentally different approach, which is, in fact, our company, we don't really want to be responsible for the customer's data. We're going to help them collect it with the sensors, and we're going to help them, point it into software that's going to be very productive for them. But we kind of want to be hands off in terms of that data. And so our sensor networks are essentially private networks that belong to the customer. They have complete control, and we don't ever even see the data that's coming, for example, from one of our sensors into the Facilio platform. We never touch that data. It just goes straight to you guys. And that's a lot easier also for the IT people to have a handle on what those security footprints are. They essentially just need to keep you in check, make sure that your security policies are acceptable for them, which they are. And it makes it a lot easier for them to manage where that's going. And you don't want all of your data going into some startup someplace that, frankly, in 2 years or 3 years might not even be around anymore, right? So we essentially said, our best way to scale the smart building and intelligent building and IoT narrative is basically say, look, we'll put all this stuff in for you. It's going to collect it. We're going to make it easy for you. But if 5 years from now we don't exist anymore, it really doesn't matter. You have complete control of all that data. You can build whatever you want on it. You can send it wherever you want to send it. And that thing is just going to keep on working forever, regardless of whether we're there to help with it or not. So I think that's really important in terms of how to scale this. And frankly, we're approaching and we're looking at, a massive, I think, growth in adoption of this type of architecture over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I can't agree more, and really looking forward to how this is going to shape up, and really excited for our own partnership with Connectric